Hi, I'm Caitriona McLaughlin and I'm a theatre director and currently Associate Director at the Abbey Theatre.
Hi,
Hello, Mark.
hi Katrina. How are you? We were joking beforehand that we've kind of got a long put off cup of tea over many, many years for talking, and now it's got to do it in camera. Um, I've known you kind of on and off for a long time, so I'm kind of interested in even taking us back kind of before that in relation to, when you were growing up, was the theatre kind of in your family, in your blood? Was it kind of there from an early age, or was it something you kind of caught on to?
Not at all, actually. And it's something like that. I'm not really, I never have a good answer for this because I don't know exactly where it came from.
Yeah.
What I do know is I was obsessed with films, old films, black and white films. And, like everyone else in the country, did the fascists and loved the fascists and would drag my poor mother to every fash going to say poems. I always loved poetry and words and language. So I think it was through the fascists that I kind of got a kind of, I suppose, love of performing. And I can't really say why exactly. I always knew that I wanted to work in theatre. I feel like I'm sort of one of the lucky ones in that regard. Like I never had a doubt. And it took a while and I had a bit of a windy road to get there. But I remember very clearly from a very young age knowing, well, I thought I wanted to be an actor, but knowing I wanted to be in the theatre.
And did you go? I mean, was it something that was kind of, in your life? Did you go to the theatre? Was there kind
Not
of?
at all. No, there wasn't one. The nearest theatre to us would have been in Derry, and that would have meant going across the border. And it was a time when you wouldn't want to have a Donegal Reg in the north at night.
Yeah.
So it never happened. There was a amateur music society and an amateur drama group, and when I was a bit older in my teens, we would go to that. Something would be on once a year, like Big Maggie or Oklahoma. I remember seeing. Actually, the two I remember are Philadelphia, Here I Come, and Oklahoma. So, and that's all I remember in terms of actually going to see anything until I started coming to visit my Auntie Breed here in Dublin in my sort of late teens. And then I remember going to the Abbey and to the Gaiety, once each at some point.
Yeah.
No, I have no relationship to it. What I do know is when I was choosing a university to go and study science, I remember I got into Galway and I got into Coleraine, and I chose Coleraine because it had a theatre.
Okay. So there was something. And were you big into, like, saying, into poetry now? Like, was reading a big thing for you? Were you a big reader when you were young?
Huge reader, yeah, but not highbrow. Anything with a boarding school. my mother had, my mother is a big reader, and there was always books in our house, and my grandfather was a reader, and so there was always these kind of, beautiful smelling books is what I remember. I remember trying to read like The Merchant of Venice before, I should have been trying to read it, and there was lots of books we weren't allowed to read. But my mom had all these, Mallory Towers, all these books from her childhood. And my dad was a teacher, so when he would be buying school books, he would always buy us books, classics, Kidnapped and Robinson Crusoe and those kind of things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nothing highbrow at all.
And come here, was like you said, mentioned poetry. Was the music kind of, was like you mentioned musical side? Was the music in your house, or did you play music or anything like that as growing up?
I was sent to piano lessons, and I was sent to Tim Whistle and Irish dancing, and I was horrendous at all of them. I can't sing, and I couldn't sing, never could sing. Don't sing, in fact. I think I was in a school choir where a teacher told me to mime when I was about 8 or 9, and I have never sung since.
that wouldn't help. That wouldn't help the drive
No.
Yeah.
I loved music, but it definitely kept the distance. Like my brother was obsessed with music growing up, and I kind of had a distance from it because I had this kind of idea that I actually thought I was tone deaf. I've since discovered I'm not. But I was tone deaf, so I kind of had this strange relationship with it. And my grandfather played piano, and my mum wanted me to, have a hobby like that. But no, it didn't bite at all.
And
Reading and poetry. I I was one of those people who was going to the fesh, far too old for it, past everyone else. When there was only about three of us in the competition, I was one of them. That kind of thing.
yeah.
Still going to the feshes,
And,
loving it too.
and how did science then? Like, where did that all come from?
I always was interested in biology, and probably if I'm well, two things. Parental guidance discouraged me from going to the theatre, but when I tried to talk to my career guidance teacher about it at school, they were adamant it was an absurd notion.
Wow.
And biology was like, we didn't even have, when I was at that point, we had the biggest secondary school in Ireland, Carndon Community School. I think there was 1,500 pupils in it at that time, and there was no theatre at all. There was no drama. There was no drama club. There was nothing. So I was in the debate society. So clearly it was all about, giving it that. Getting in front of an audience and giving it, that. I often say too, I was very shy, incredibly shy growing up. So I found a massive release in using other people's words, and I think that's partly what drew me to the feshes, to have someone else's words to speak and to be listened to.
Yeah.
I kind of have discovered since that was probably a big draw for me.
Okay. And then when you went to Coleraine then, and like obviously what you had to grow on you to want to be on the stage and for different reasons, but did you get involved early on in the drama society? Like, was that kind of something that happened naturally for you?
No. So I went the year before, when I went to Coleraine, the year before, one of the students had been involved in a terrible accident. They'd fallen out of the lighting rig and broken their back. So students were no longer allowed to work in the theatre. So at the end of first year, I tried to swap out of biology into theatre studies. And they said no, because I had no arts, they said. But I had English, Irish, French. I was thinking I had plenty of arts, but I had chemistry, biology, agricultural science, and social science as well, and maths, obviously. So they said no, absolutely not. And I was absolutely devastated. I don't think, I still have this horrible feeling when I think about it. Then I decided to audition. I applied at some point applied to Trinity, but to the more academic course. And when I went down there, they said, but all of your form, there was 10, you filled out 10 things on the form. 9 of them were for science, and I had sneaked in studies on the last one without the career guidance teacher seeing it. And when I went there, they said to me, well, clearly this is an afterthought. And it wasn't even it wasn't like the Sam Beckett, it wasn't a performance-based course, it was the other thing. But I remember you had to do the interview 3 at a time. And I remember being in the interview and people talking about youth theatre and all of that, and I hadn't a clue what they were talking about. I hadn't a notion, never heard of a youth theatre. and then after they wouldn't let me swap in Coleraine, then I applied to the Gaiety School. I remember getting on the train in Belfast and learning a monologue on the way down, and then having to audition and having to improvise in an audition and not know what improvise meant. Oh, it was ridiculous.
And so what happened after that then? What was kind of, did you go back to Coleraine and kind of, did it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. I went back. I went to see stuff in the theatre. The first book I ever bought actually in Coleraine was The Empty Space by Peter Brook.
Yeah.
When I went to buy my science book. So I was reading, there was a theatre department there. There was a couple of external workshops that I did. And then at one point, I did the O'Casey summer school. Siobhan O'Casey had a summer school, and it was 6 weeks, I think. And it was Monday to Saturday. It was very intense at the time. And I remember doing that. Like I got a bursary I did an audition, got a bursary to do that. And the voice teacher in that was from Yale School of Drama. And she took me then to Yale. I did audition for Yale. Sure, I didn't know what I was doing, and I hadn't a clue, and
Yeah, so that
audition for scholarship, hadn't a notion.
But I mean,
ended up coming back here.
But it was an incredible experience, though, to actually kind of doing that process, to kind of be in that headspace of kind of going, "Ah, feck it, I'm going to try this."
Yeah. and like in the end, it's very hard. In the end, I ended up working as a biochemist, and I remember being in the lab. My first job in the morning. I said this somewhere before. Actually, I feel like I'm repeating myself. Anyway, I was in the sewage department.
Lovely.
And yeah, oh, fabulous. And my first job in the morning was to take these samples of different sewage at different stages of treatment and filter them through these little discs of paper. And I remember, like for months, I used to be sick every morning from the smell. I couldn't get used to the smell. And anyway, I was there about, 9 months or something. And I was doing this, filtering it through this paper. And I looked down and there was this tiny Florida broccoli on the paper. And I thought, no, I know where that is being to end up on that piece of paper. No. And I went in and wrote a letter of resignation. I had also gone for another job as a microbiologist, funnily enough for infectious diseases, and I had just the day before been offered the job. And I feel like that little bit of broccoli was like a sign to me, because I was thinking, okay, either I commit and I take this job in Antrim, it was Antrim Hospital, or I go no. So I wrote a letter of resignation, lied to my parents, told them that I didn't get the job in Antrim, and went and volunteered in the Playhouse in Derry.
Wow.
And I have to say, I owe having a career in theatre to a woman called Sinead Devine, who worked in the Playhouse, who took me as a kind of an assistant, trained me as a conflict resolution facilitator and as a youth theatre facilitator, and I suppose everything else happened after that.
That's
she
gas.
was amazing.
I mean, there's a lot there.
I know.
I don't think I'm ever going to be able to look at broccoli in the same way again myself. But because I suppose it's amazing, and I love kind of talking to people about the development of their careers, because certainly kind of outside in the public and in kind of even for young people, no matter what career they're doing, there's a kind of forced narrative that you're meant to know very early on or get your gig earlier on, and then you kind of. But most of us, and particularly I say people in the arts, there's a very, very there's no true line to people's career, and it kind of ebbs and flows. But also, I think looking back over what you've done, there's also a sense of choice. It seems to be a sense of choice around all that. Certainly as things progress for you, there's there's that kind of. You're one of those people, and that's kind of what I really, really like about your work. There seems to be, there's no division between, say, the palette in which you're working. Do you know what I mean? If you're doing this, it's the same kind of digging that you do as you would do in, say, a national theatre or an opera or a community engagement piece or facilitation. And that's, I personally, I think that's brilliant. And it shows in the quality of the work. Is that something for you that kind of was very early on there for you?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because that has always been really, really, really important to me. But I didn't know what it was, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
What it started as was a total lack of experience and the feeling that I need to teach myself with doing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And also because I started working with Sinead and working around kind of conflict and real people and real people's lives, there's a certain weight to that you can't be light-handed with. So even like the very first thing I ever really, directed was a youth theatre version of Romeo and Juliet, but it was in Derry, and these people had, spent their entire childhood in the conflict. So even that had a weight with it. And I think that's really informed me without me knowing how that happened. And then, like later on in my career, I got a Clore Fellowship and I went and worked in New York, and I worked with a company called Ballymun Theatre Company. And there was the artistic director at the time was Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I've talked about this as well, I think, before. But I remember him saying, every opportunity to work is an opportunity to improve your craft. And it was about respect. He was saying that about respect and about respecting everybody's art equally and not having, a judgment, because Labyrinth Theatre Company is this massive group of artists and, with all levels of experience. It's funny, I was watching Ozarks last night and Felix Solis was one of the first people I met when I went there. And it's so funny watching like American TV. I still don't get over the novelty of it. Yeah. And Felix, being this really kind of cruel drug baron when I know he's such a dote. But the thing about Labyrinth is everybody in the company is expected to try another discipline over the course of this summer intensive that they do. So you will get people, trying to write for the first time or trying to act for the first time or trying to direct for the first time. And Phil said, Phil's kind of, and it's not just Phil, John Ortiz, the founder members of that company, their ethos is that you take everybody 100% seriously in that. So when I went first, I remember seeing people, like I saw Phil read something that I had decided in my great wisdom was a pile of shite. And it was an intern had written it. Until I heard him read it. And it wasn't a pile of shite when he read it. And by giving it the full respect and by giving it all of his ability, he was able to help that writer see the potential and help us all see the potential in that piece of writing. And it struck me like a slap in the face that if you give the best that you've got to anything, then you can somehow help release the potential of it.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I have actively tried to do that. I can't say I've always succeeded, but it was a big light bulb moment. So I do actively try to do that.
I mean, it's interesting because there's a couple of things there that we'll come back to in a minute, because I think, it's kind of obviously facilitates and assists the development of the artist that you're kind of working with, but it also says it's a learning opportunity for oneself. Do you know what I mean? It gives as much as you get as much as you're kind of giving in that kind of relationship. Come here. Yeah. Go back to, say you're in Derry and the Playhouse and the conflict resolution. Was acting still, like, did the acting kind of start to dissipate, or was that still kind of what you wanted?
That was all I wanted. Everything else was trying to help me get to that.
Yeah.
That's before I even trained or anything. I went to the Gaiety then, but while I was there, you know, people like Gardzanicha were coming to Derry, Augusto Boal, people like Cathy McArdle, who was working in the, I think she was education director in the Abbey or running the project or something at the time.
Yeah.
So there were always really interesting workshops and thinkers and styles of theatre being made. Ridiculousness, I remember doing workshops with ridiculousness that just were the most embarrassing experience of my life. So at that point, because obviously, you know, there was funding around trying to find solutions to a peace process, because it was before the Good Friday Agreement. There was a lot of interest in the arts and what the arts could do in terms of, you know, helping people come to terms with their experiences there, and also I personally, I think Gardzanicha in particular, when I saw what Gardzanicha did in terms of making theatre, it was like nothing I had ever experienced. It was theatre that was so all-encompassing. You know, it was a lifestyle. It was a commitment to a life, because they made their work living together in a house in a top of a mountain in Poland, and then they developed a piece of work over a year, and then they spent 2 years touring around the world with that piece of work, collecting songs and people and music and stories, and then that's what they took back to make the next piece of work. Like, it kind of blew my mind. And they did a kind of residential, they did a couple actually, but I did 1 2-week residential with them in Derry, where we tried to, you know, they tried to emulate that, and we were doing night runs and doing rehearsals in the middle of the night and going for swims, you know, and I was like mortified, because, you know, we were going up to Buncrana for a swim in the middle of the night, like, it's just not what you did. And they were skinny dipping. I, however, was too Irish for that. When I think of the stupidity of me, like, but they were amazing. They changed everything in my thinking.
But there seems to be, I mean, you know, there seems to be, though, have been and still remain that kind of, you say stupidity, but also a sense of adventure. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like going, I'm going to do that, I'm going to go over to Yale to try that, I'm going to go, it'll be that sense of yeah, like, not, I don't mean running away with the circus, but that kind of sense of following, following your nose or following your heart or passion or instinct into something.
Yeah. Some would say blind stubbornism.
Really?
But you know what it was actually, in truth, it was actually ignorance. Because when I would launch into something, I didn't know what I was launching into. I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. I just knew, I want to do that. I'll go and do that if I can, you know.
Yeah.
And because I was and the other thing I have to say is the reason I was able to do
should tell you that they are segregated from the communities that you live in yourself.
Sorry.
Because they don't live amongst you. They live amongst people like them.
Come here. Through all that, I mean, you kind of call it stupidity, but, you know, there's a sense of adventure there, that kind of try, you know, going to Yale, you know, going swimming in Buncrana tonight, you know, but that sense of kind of trying new things, was that something that just came, was that instinct, Caitriona, that you kind of went, feck it, I'm going to try this?
I suppose in lots of ways it was stubbornism. I was going to be an actor no matter who told me I wasn't, and there was no getting away from that. And the other thing is, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. So when I would go and say, right, I'm going to do this workshop with Gardzanicha, I didn't actually know what that meant. This was my introduction. I didn't even know what a workshop was.
Yeah.
So to end up, you know, with 20 people swimming at 2 a.m. in Buncrana, which is, you know, my local next town over.
Yeah.
I nearly died. I'll never forget the shock and the embarrassment of that moment. thinking anybody can see me here. However, I still, you know, did it. I definitely still, you know, went for it.
Yeah.
But because I was volunteering in the playhouse, they, you know, kind of facilitated me to participate in all these workshops that I didn't have to pay for.
Yeah.
Because at this time I was on the dole. So I have a massive amount of gratitude to Pauline, who was the artistic director of the Playhouse, and Sinead, who gave me all these opportunities, you know.
And
like
then,
that's the thing.
Yeah, and then after that, you kind of have this, you still have the acting. What was next for you?
So I came to Dublin. Oh yeah, well, like all of this was happening, and I was kind of not really, I hadn't really told my parents, which is ridiculous. They still thought I was pursuing a science degree, so I did. So I'm going to out myself now. I did a master's in science communication at DCU, but really I also went to Gaiety School. They had a course which they don't do anymore. I think it was the first time they did it, called a performance diploma. And it was, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 3 days a week and a Saturday or something, 3 evenings and a Saturday, something like that. So I was doing that, but really supposed to be doing a master's in science communication and traveling up from Armagh, because the first half of the year, the science communication was in Armagh. So I was coming up and down from Armagh for the first half of the year. I was running a youth theatre in Donegal. So I started in the Gaiety in, I think it was September, October. And then I started a youth theatre where I'm from in January. Because, what they never knew at the time is I was literally 3 months ahead of them. Well, what happened is that we got funding from Beyond Borders for me to be paid to deliver workshops in Donegal. So I was basically living, like, I was able to pay my way in a way, doing those workshops and running the youth theatre.
But that must have been, I mean, that's a lot, you know, in relation to do at the best of times. But, you know, when you're kind of having your first opportunity to really kind of, you know, carve out, you know, skills in acting or a trade, you know, kind of trying to explore that kind of craft while also running a youth theatre and, you know, doing an MA, that's, yeah, that's an interesting.
Yeah, I have to confess that the dissertation it was an MSc, the dissertation never happened.
All right.
Never got it.
Okay, there you go. We'll just mourn that for a minute and then move on. And
I do have a little regret about that, actually.
But you can
anyway.
always go back to it, you know. Just if you had a few days off, you know, do the dissertation, you'd be grand. So coming from Donegal to Derry to Dublin, beyond anything that you're doing in your life, that's a bit of a journey, you know, in relation to, for anybody, and also then starting out doing acting, and the different, you know, not saying, but the avenues that you wanted to open start opening up for you, in relation to kind of now being in Dublin and studying acting.
Well, what I realise now is that I was kind of a self-conscious actor, and you know that doesn't work. That just doesn't work. You know, I wasn't very good at putting myself out there. I loved it, and I had never planned to move into directing. It wasn't a conscious decision in that way. I had a company with some people that I was at drama school with, and something that happened was somebody came to us and they wanted to put on Rent the Musical, and they had a lot of money to do it, and but they didn't have a theatre company. And we had a little theatre company, you know, making shows at that point. I think we had just done translations in the Sam Beckett, you know, on about £4,000 or euro. I can't remember. was about that anyway. And then he wanted to do Rent in the Olympia. So, which was like a whole other world. And we thought, oh, this is great. That will make money. And then we can go back to our serious theatre and, pick up where we left off. But what actually happened was we did do Rent in the Olympia, but there were 3 of us in the company and none of us were musicians. None of us were musical theatre or interested in it. I hadn't even seen a musical. So we didn't even know what, apart from Oklahoma in the parish hall, but like we didn't really know what to do with, handing the company over to someone. Yeah. So we decided that because I now was an experienced youth theatre director, I had the closest thing to some skill that could be used. So we agreed on the basis that I would be the assistant director. I mean, when I think of it now, which I thought meant I was going to sit in the auditorium and take notes for the director and make them coffee. But of course, things never go as you plan. And to this day, I will never forget. The first couple of weeks were workshops. I'll never forget hearing Michael Rand, who was one of the singers, sing Santa Fe for the first time. It's one of those things that is emblazoned in my memory. It was amazing. And the singers, and there was a mix of singers from London, obviously, because at that point it was impossible to find black singers and dancers with West End musical skills. So we hired people in London, and then we hired some people locally as well. But the names were all from London. Michael Rand was phenomenal. But anyway, that's beside the point.
But did you get, sorry, I was wondering, even though, you were kind of green in relation to directing, but did you get a sense, like when you were involved in that, in even a short way, kind of going, oh, this feels a bit different, or was there anything there that kind of triggered something in you?
From the directing perspective, yeah. What I loved was the putting all the bits together, watching Phil kind of invent on the spot, if you know what I mean. And the other thing that happened that I think was a massive push is Phil got sick 2 weeks in, and we were due to choreograph the opening of it, and he had to go back to London, and so I had to do it. And in a way, when you're forced to do something like that, you just do it, and you front it out, and you can't let anyone know that you haven't a clue what you're doing. So in a way, getting away with that, I thought, oh, I'd like to learn how to do this properly. Okay. But I never had enough. I always felt, it's funny, and I feel like it's a small regret. I never could get other assisting work. Phil took me to London, which is how I ended up going to London, to be his assistant on this Christmas show that year with him in London, and I stayed there since, more or less, over and back. But the first few years I was over and back, and obviously the last 3 years I've been here and not there really at all. Yeah. But that's how I ended up going to London, and I kept hoping that I would get assistant roles with, different kinds of directors, and it never happened. So I ended up directing things on the fringe, but I never felt that I had actually learned. I felt I was just chancing my arm for years, and it was nearly always new writing. And I remember, I had been doing that for about 4 years. I've been, the first thing that I got to choose, because I had helped Phil, and he was part of the Finborough Theatre, I got half a slot to share with somebody else to do something I wanted. And I did Frank Pig Says Hello, which is The Butcher Boy by Pat McCabe. And that was my first kind of professional directing gig, and the first time I got to choose what I wanted to do. And then because of that, I got other work, but I never chose it. It was and it, you know, it was paid, and it was an amazing gift, you know, but it was always new writing, and it was strange new writing very often, you know. It wasn't maybe well, at that stage I felt I was in a pattern of being given plays that needed to be fixed, and I use that term very loosely. But that was my perception at the time, and I didn't really think I had the skills to manage that. So I was just chancing my arm. So I, at that point, made a decision to take a break, and I took a job as an education director in Peckham, in the theatre in Peckham. And I, around the same time, I was an associate director on the New Statesman with Rick Mail, which is a thing where you kind of look after someone else's show. And also then shortly after that, I got a Clore Fellowship, which kind of was the thing that changed everything, because it bought me time, and it's paid for me to go to Labyrinth. And I had, you know, David Lan at the Young Vic was you know, he let me shadow him for a couple of weeks, and I spent 9 months at the Royal Court. So those things
flipped it,
I think, made me,
I mean, like, it's interesting when you talk there about that journey, because like the Clore, you know, everyone that does Clore talks about how transformative it kind of is, but also the process of actually applying for Clore seems to be a transformative process for your inner thinking around what you want to do. You know what I mean? It kind of, there's a journey there which must have been, I totally see it. I mean, again, you know, I think that's fantastic to hear. Like, you kind of you felt you were kind of in a space where you were meeting yourself coming back in a way, and decided to take a break. And then paths open, you know. But I think, was that an interest in that kind of sitting down and having to work through that process of applying?
I think it's because, well, a couple of things. I was always coming over and back and doing workshops and conflict resolution work, and working with the International Red Cross in the North. And I did several projects every year in the North, you know, coming over and back. So I always had that connection. Like, I never lost that connection with where I started, in a way. And then when I was in London, pardon me, I needed, I was working at the Natural History Museum at weekends, you know, was an explainer. So I kind of kept a connection with the science through that. And I felt that when I took, and then I was doing this education work during the week, and, you know, I was all over the place. And I felt like I was, you know, becoming very quickly a kind of dilettante. Is that the right word? Somebody who does little bits of everything. Is that the right word?
No, well, I think, but I think it's interesting.
In the Victorian sense, you know what I mean? Somebody who picks little bits of things, or, you know.
But I think it's interesting, and sorry, not to cut across you, but I think in that era as well, it's funny, I reflect a lot in the last kind of decade in Irish theatre. What you're talking about there is now seen as a plus, but certainly when I was coming out of college and starting a career, that was a minus. You had to be one thing. If you did loads of things like the community youth theatre, directing, you're like going, oh God, he must be awful at them all, you know, whatever. You couldn't.
Totally. That's what I felt, and acting, then trying to act and not succeeding, and not putting any commitment into it at all, you know. And I totally agree with you. I felt like it was, I didn't know what it was. Like, I felt like I was trying to figure something out, or trying to the truth is, I was trying to find a way to focus on being an actor and get the job that would release me from everything else. And then the more I directed, the more I realized, oh, actually, no, it's directing actually I want to do. And I remember that being a massive decision to let the acting go. And then I seriously started, and that was around the time I became the education director, I suppose, because I thought, you know, I have to commit to one thing here. And when I did my application, which is what I'm going around the houses, Mark. But what I was trying to say is, when I did my application to Clore, a friend, and Sinead again, the woman I started with in Derry, is who recommended that I do it, and it was a Northern Ireland fellowship that I got from the Northern Ireland Arts Council, and it was, I think I got it partly because of the work I was doing in communities there. And normally when you do a Clore Fellowship, the idea is that it opens your perspective to other cultural institutions and other arts forms, and not your own that you've become embedded in.
Yeah.
But I was the opposite. So I had to go to them and go, listen, I'm in a totally different position. I'm working at the Natural History Museum. I'm working, you know, in Peckham Youth Theatre, and I'm going to Ireland and doing things with the International Red Cross, and I'm directing a show in November, and I need to do, you know, narrow and focus. And I want a theatre mentor. You get a lot of a mentor.
Yeah.
I had to do research, and you got to do a placement. So they were all theatre.
Okay.
They were all, actually, more specifically, they were professional theatre, because at that stage as well, I was making a separation in my head between community theatre and kind of giving it in my head a lesser value.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had got into it with no skills and no experience, I didn't really fully understand the potential of it. So it took me doing the Clore Fellowship to actually sit back and actually analyse quality of the work and the people we were working with, and reframe it entirely in my mind, because the impulses, the artistic impulse, the commitment and the work that we did, and actually the impact of it, were all as impactful and important as anything I've done since.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I think, you know, as we go on, like say the decade since, you know, when your kind of professional directing career kind of since Clore, if you kind of look at it, it's kind of had that segues between both those spaces, you know, between, you know, more, and I don't mean community driven, but more kind of like work with kind of based in communities or with communities of interest, but also, you know, works. I think I'm kind of thrown in a good way by I love metaphors, but the metaphor of you sifting through that sewage and finding, like, that to me, you know, that's not that far from being a director in an awful lot of ways. It's a very, very different thing, but just that sense of community, and I mean that in because the word's overused, but being a you know, a combination of lots of individual people and how they kind of cohabit together in very toxic relationships or in very relationships they don't know. And that really seems from, it seems to be at the heart of an awful lot of your explorations. And I really do see, you know, I mean, I spoke to you after I saw on Raftery's Hill kind of, you know, a couple of years ago, which completely blew me away. What went on that stage in relation to the amount of kind of excavation that had been done. But other stuff that I've seen you do, it's the same kind of thing. It's really putting the people or the community of a play under the microscope. So it's a very long-winded question, but is that something that kind of you overtly go after?
Yeah, I do. There's two things about that. The psychology of behavior, in different contexts, really interests me. How we behave, just, I suppose, in a simple form, what I mean is how we behave in situations really interests me as human beings. I'm just very interested in how people work together, how they communicate, what that thing is when you have two people together, good, bad, or indifferent, you know, what the thing is that's specific to that moment and that greeting, you know, greeting to departure, what the specificity of that is. I'm fascinated by it. I also am completely passionate about the art form of acting.
Okay.
I love quality acting. And I don't even know what the definition of that is. But what I do know is it makes you feel before you think. And that's what I'm interested in on stages. I'm interested in feeling something before I think it. And that's what I'm interested in mining for when I'm putting a piece of work on stage. And, you know, it also has an impact on, you know, I suppose the kind of work that I make, and maybe the kind of actors that I work with, you know, and you know, and that is becoming the skill of acting for that to be your interest at the moment is really, really an interesting space to be in, because, you know, sometimes it's not the most important thing in a project, but when it's your passion, it's complicated, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliantly put, because I think there's, yeah, because I mean, without that, everything's going to fall apart. I mean, you know, you kind of, and the mining piece is interesting, because I think there's, like, if you look, I suppose, at, you know, City Song or Raftery's Hill or operas, there's very different aesthetics, you know, because of the nature of the work and the nature of the piece. But that feeling before thinking is really, you know, even being in a room with that, even you as that kind of, you know, lightning rod to kind of, and that's what I mean. That's what I'm always interested when I talk to directors, because that's certainly something that it's very hard to describe from when you're directing a play in a room and you get that sense instinctually in yourself as the director, and how to kind of maintain that and transfer and, like, you know, make that live for a much broader kind of canvas. That's, you know, and I think it's such an instinctual journey that it's sometimes very hard to put words on it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny when you say that, you know, I think that's, you know, when you were asking me before about sort of navigating my journey from Donegal through, I think I just feel before I think, and I react before I think, and then I discover if it was a good or bad idea later.
Yeah. But
so I think maybe, and that's never occurred to me, it's only because of how you articulated that I'm thinking that now.
But that's kind of not a bad way to enter a rehearsal room either. you know what I mean? That you kind of, that you have the work done, obviously. But then in a way, when you enter in, you got to free that space that all that work never happened. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of that. And in relation to, sorry, it was in relation to the kind of, because there's a huge broad range of work that you've done, you know, and is it a sense for you, like, say for something like Foil Punt, and I'm just picking that one, that was actually, maybe just tell us a bit about that piece, and we can kind of talk about it then.
Foil Punt was a piece that was made around a guy in Donegal in Greencastle who is a boat builder, and his family had made boats in that area of Greencastle, McDonald's Boatyard it's called, and they'd made boats up there for 6 generations, and he and his brother, and they made handmade wooden punts called the Foil Punt, and originally they were fishing boats, and then they became racing punts. And then sort of in the last whatever many years, they kind of moved more into fiberglass boats, and, you know, fixing up huge trawlers, and, you know, so they're kind of carpenters, boat builders, carpenters who've adapted into modern boat building. But the guy we made the piece originally, the guy that sort of was the starting point for the piece, really, which is fairer to say, we met him doing another project that I did a couple of years earlier, again with Russia. I've done 3 projects in Donegal with Russia. We're both passionate about bringing theatre to rural areas and making theatre for communities in rural Ireland. And we both have a particular love of Donegal due to our family connections, but in Donegal. So they've been in Donegal and moved around that northwestern region. But Phil McDonald, who is the boat builder, has no daughters. And we were doing this project, and he told us this incredible story, showed us the boats he'd made, showed us how he'd made the boats, talked about how for generations, you know, that they'd come from Scotland and they had made boats here, and then said, and we'll be the last generation because we've no sons, sorry, not daughters, sons, we've no sons, we've only daughters, was the phrase. And there won't be any boats built past beyond us.
Yeah.
And our initial reaction was one of, don't like that. As you can imagine, we were like, but actually it's the daughters' choices. They have no interest, obviously, in building boats. But there was a way with which he spoke that Rush and I became completely kind of, I don't know, completely enthralled with. He has this lovely, quiet, natural storytelling, descriptive voice. He's quite shy. It was so beautiful listening to him. And we decided we would definitely be back and make a show about him. And then we started to investigate what that could be. And Russia had set up the local group. And we were talking a lot about boats and how boats have different meanings now. You know, a boat in a European context and coming into Irish waters. And we started to think a lot about the kind of juxtaposition of this man's skill and his boat building skills that was dying out, and this need for boats for survival in different parts of Europe, and people coming into European shores in any kind of floating object. And we wanted to make something that kind of spoke to that moment, that sort of shifting moment in Philip's life, but also that shifting moment in Irish culture. And we worked with Farah El, a beautiful singer, musician, Little John Nee, Liam Bell, Jenny Moran. We had a kind of a food element to the whole thing. You know, we incorporated a meal. And we created this kind of event piece around those two narratives, and performed it in Donegal, Sligo and Leitrim.
I mean, the reason I ask, I suppose, is just because, you know, your work, and it's not a rural thing, it's fascinating because it kind of, one part of the brain is kind of going, you have a great, obviously because of where you're from, but you have a great, you know, you have a great insight and grow for that kind of rural, but it's also, it shows the same in 2 pints, or so I think it's, I don't know, it kind of strikes me that's kind of, it's a place where people sit in their stories in a way, and in kind of, it's probably the best way I can describe it, but also the fact that, like, even Cityscape is about people trying to find those stories, or like find it, you know, in bed. And I think that's a really interesting thing about your work. It's kind of coming from, you know, a deeply rural is the wrong word because it exists in inner cities as well, but like a deeply rooted sense of generational habitation in a place. That's
it. It's kind of, it's very, it's I think that's right. I think I respond to kind of traditional Irish storytelling in some capacity. It's like and you know, that can be a dirty word, I know, but it is, it somehow comes from the connection to the story, to the place, the connection between place and story and person, storyteller, and audience.
That sense of people that have been in places, you know, for a while, that kind of sense of not necessarily rural, but people who've lived there for generations. Is that something that kind of is there for you?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, you know, I do think that I come, like I suppose my impulse is very traditional in the sense that what I'm interested in is people and places and their stories. And I think that that's not a moment. That's not about a moment in time. That's about everything that happened before and everything that will happen next.
Okay.
And that kind of line and that connection with our own history, and that connection, you know, like that connection with the origins of theatre and with the creation of the human species, I suppose, to come back to the science. or not creation, more the evolution of the human species,
Yeah.
with all our flaws and complications and connection to the animal kingdom, I suppose. You know, impulses that are not necessarily honourable, shall we say, or noble in any shape or form. The truth of that, I'm fascinated by.
It's interesting because, and I'm going to not skip forward. I'm going to there's a couple of plays I want to talk to you about kind of in between, but I'm kind of, what you said there though, being part of the National Theatre must be a huge thing, you know, in relation to that national psyche, exploration, you know, being in that and being able to explore works, the likes of Marina Carr's, the likes of, you know, Dylan's new work, like and so that sense of actually, it's directing on that stage as well, or in that kind of context as well.
Yeah, you know, the idea of privilege is a complicated thing at the moment. Well, it's always complicated, but it's a complicated thing to talk about, I suppose, because it's not fair. But I don't say lightly that I consider working at the Abbey an absolute privilege. And it's a privilege I don't take lightly. And that's not to say that I don't think that I should be there. I do. I think I've worked hard to get there. But it's not lost on me, the absolute privilege in terms of the quality of work, in terms of the quality of artists that you have access through, purely because they're interested in working with you. A lot of people, you know, it's funny, people who know my work for a long time would say, you know, similarly, that my work hasn't changed at all in many ways in terms of what I'm trying to get at, in terms of how I approach something. But what has changed is my exposure a little bit because of working on the Abbey stage, with the resources that you get to play with, the capacity for letting your artistic imagination go to places where, you know, when you're used to curtailing them and making them smaller and compromising them. I mean, obviously you still do that to a certain degree. It's not like working in Germany, you know, you can't just go, you know, or even London, you know, the National Theatre in London's a whole other level of access. But one of the things that happened is after I did the Clover Fellowship, or when I was working with Labyrinth, I got to make some work in America, and that was budgets beyond your imagination. I worked at a place called Bard Summerscape. The budgets we got to work with would make your eyes boggle. But what it did, it trained you how to use resources.
Yeah.
And had I not done that, I would have been completely out of my depth, because I never had access to anything like that here or in London. I was working on the Fringe in London, you know, smaller to mid-sized theatres. And here I was primarily working, I suppose, in regional spaces. Not that there's any limit in what you can do in terms of your imagination, but there's a massive limit in terms of resources. What you'd be doing in the Playhouse or even in the project with an independent company is very different to what you can consider doing on the Abbey main stage. Yeah. So yeah, that is something I'm grateful for every day. But also, you know, it's not easy, is it, being in theatre? It's hard work, and and I don't, you know, I don't know how to really talk about that, because it's a choice, but it's a compulsion, but it's a choice. And it's very hard to survive in this industry. And, you know, to have the opportunity to be part of the culture, to be part of the national conversation, for people to come and see something that we do in, you know, a boat shed in Moville, or the, you know, like wherever, a knitting factory in Gweedore, because it's partly because I've been able to do stuff here at the Abbey, so it gives you a credibility. So it's not like, I mean, it's the same places I've always worked. It's the same, very often the same artists, you know, that I'm working with or collaborating with. But because I now am considered, you know, able to be trusted with the Abbey main stage, then it does something else in terms of the work you can make elsewhere.
But I think,
and I don't take that lightly.
But there's also a sense as well of, you know, you mentioned there are artists you collaborate with and different spaces and that, and your work not having changed. I mean, it's fascinating because, again, I'm kind of, you know, you look at work that you've done outside the Abbey, and like from, you know, with Amy Conroy and that brilliant show, like, you know, Look Just Kiss You Low, and other stuff with Landmark, and kind of a kind of coterie of artists that you've had association with throughout your career. But yet the sense of, say, City Song, and I'm just kind of picking these three out, kind of City Song 2 and Rafters, because they're very different work. And obviously you were set to work with Marina again on The Boy, you know, this year, but obviously Mr. and Mrs. COVID has got in the way of that for the moment. But the sense of, like, say for Raftery's Hill, for example, you know, you talk about, it's funny when you mention the Animal Kingdom, one of the images out of that play that kind of haunts me, you know, and particularly for some reason from your production, was the dead animals on the hill, and the kind of the sense of stubbornness and the sense of, you know, toxicity, and the sense of, you know, yet bizarrely what you seem to find in all these characters, as dark as they are, is a sense of kind of beauty, and that's kind of very, not the right word in its normal context, but on Raftery's Hill was a very beautiful piece. Yeah, it was, and it was kind of, and that was really fucked up in a way, because and I'm wondering in relation to scale. Sorry, again, a long question, but in relation to scale, your work in that kind of context versus, say, your work in opera, where it's the same, but like those emotions are out there in relation to the music and the song in the operatic setting. But in something like Two Pints, it's obviously miniature between two men at the bar. In City Song, it's kind of lyrical, you know, storytelling, and in Raftery's Hill, it's contained within this, you know, broken language or kind of violent language. But is that, I just get a sense of that's a musicality to all your work, which is kind of very strange, if that's the way of putting it.
Yeah, it's interesting you noticed that, because I think that I do think like that. And you know, when I started working in opera in the beginning, I remember the first conductor I worked with first saying to me that I had, given now my horror of music because of what happened when I was younger, said I had an innate musicality and an instinct for timing in opera. So, and I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I think the rhythm of a piece is like the soul of it. And there is no way to know what that is until you have everyone in the room. And it's kind of almost in the space between the lines. A lot of my work has space in it. And I think that allows the audience, like, I'm really, really conscious of that sometimes. It kind of goes very fast, very fast, very fast, and then has some space. And that very consciously to allow the audience to catch their breath, but also have an opinion. Have an opinion, but hopefully the space is in places, or I try and find space in places where you're not second guessing what's coming, if you know what I mean. And I think that comes from me wanting to say that the people, so let's take on Raftery's Hill, because for me, when I was casting on Raftery's Hill, the first thing I said was, I want to cast Red Raftery as the person that everyone in the audience wants to go to the pub with after or before, go to the pub with and be in the company of. And that is because people who do those kind of monstrous acts are not monstrous. And the other thing is they get away with it, and they nearly it's not that they get away with it, it's not that they hide it. For me, it's that people accommodate them by kind of not acknowledging that thing.
Yeah.
Like it's like the violent, the group of guys at school, and one of them's a bit too violent, and because he's funny, or people kind of let him be violent. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean.
I'm really interested in the complication of that. One of the very first pieces I ever made in Northern Ireland was about how, as a community in Derry, we turned away from what was happening in order to allow ourselves to coexist with it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that charming people, especially in rural Ireland, I mean, probably the same here, actually definitely the same in cities, but charming people get away with very bad behavior. And we accommodate it because we don't want to be the one to burst the bubble, or we don't want to be the one to be the, break the crack, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so when I was casting Red Raftery, there was, a couple of things I wanted, but I wanted to cast him as the person everyone would want to go and have a laugh with in the pub.
Yeah. I'd say certainly before the play, maybe not afterwards, but certainly.
You say that, Mark. You say that, but obviously what happens. There's a violent rape at the end of Act 1, and then we have Act 2, and it's one of the cleverest plays I've ever read in what it's doing to an audience, that play, because what it does is it allows the audience to see us accommodate the act in a way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And halfway through that second act, there is a joke that Red Raftery says, which is when his friend who's with him all through the play from the opening scene, he basically says that he makes a joke about his daughter. Basically, I will not say what it is, but he makes a really inappropriate joke about his daughter. But it is funny. And I knew that if I could get a laugh on that joke, then I would succeed in delivering the play.
Yeah.
Because that is what we do without thinking.
Yeah.
We got a laugh on that line every night.
Yeah.
Not everybody.
Yeah, no, I know.
But everybody.
But I think that's a very interesting human point there, kind of, I think that goes to the heart of, I think, of that. I will say an astonishing production of it, because I think, there was a sense as well of even the fiddle, even the sense of music kind of just sitting there, and that kind of juxtaposition between the beautiful violin and the violet landscape of that the words painted, and then the freaking horrificness of what you're seeing. But at the heart of it, you've mentioned bursting the bubbles, but it's also who's going to take the responsibility for bringing down a house of cards, because then you are the one that's empowered. Then you are the one that has to fix it. Then it's not just kind of going, stop all that, because then it's on you now. And that's and I suppose that exists. We go back to human condition, and kind of a lot of work kind of exists, a lot of theatre work, and across any play, you pick anyone's plays, but those choices that people make to not do things, to me, are way more interesting than the ones. I think in life we kind of caught ourselves that, I always have arguments with my mother about this, kind of going, she'd be kind of going, I'm not going to do that. I'd be kind of going, that's a choice. That's a choice. You know, if you want to go out, it's a choice, but staying at home is also a choice. And I think there's that sense that we don't really, I think part of the Irish psyche is we don't see that those things as choices. Doing nothing is not a choice.
Yeah, that's right. That is so true. And we do it. We all do it.
Yeah.
We all do it to the detriment of people's lives.
Yeah.
Look at the right provision.
Yeah. We blind spot it. You know, it's kind of going, oh, well, that's the way it is. So, you know, rather than it's a choice. You know, there's a choice behind those things.
Yeah.
Come here.
You know, we learned a big lesson with Waking the Feminist, because I see what I'm doing here with you now. I wouldn't have done that before Waking the this. I wouldn't have done this before Waking the Feminists, because I would have told myself I can't do that. I can't talk in front, you know, in a public space.
Yes.
And when we did that event in the Abbey, and I saw how many women there were that I'd never heard speak, I had no idea what they sounded like or what they had to say for themselves. And there were so many of them, Mark, and there were twice as many who weren't on that stage. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like, I have to get over it. You know, I have to get over it. I have to, it's my job, actually. It's my job, because it's partly why it took me so long to get into theatre, is that shyness. It's a shyness, and you think it's a condition. It is a condition. It's a condition you find very hard. It's very hard to break. I'm not underestimating it. But at some point, for me, I got to a point sitting on that stage and I went, oh my God, I have allowed this. I've allowed this by choosing, opting out, the amount of things I've opted out of, because I've thought, I can't do that. And then I thought, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I can't do it. At least if I do it, maybe somebody will go, I can do that better. That's what I was thinking. So yeah. I'm doing far more of this kind of thing since then. And I think that is something that is very Irish. You know, I think that's something I inherited from my family. And it comes alongside that thing of not putting your head above the parapet, you know. Don't draw attention to yourself. Whatever you do, don't draw attention to yourself. Or expose anything, or, you know.
But I think that goes right from, like, you know, the statutory political and social structures right down to the local pub, the rural setting, and it kind of has its feet in the church, it has its feet in post-colonialism, it has its feet in a violent past, but I think what interests me is that when it becomes shown to you, that's terrifying, because you kind of go, oh fuck, okay, Jesus, then it's easy to stop. Well, not easy, but it's a choice to stop doing that. But you have to take it on yourself, and but again, you kind of, you know, again, metaphorically, isn't that the joy of being in a rehearsal room, of being allowed to explore living people's lives with other living people and the choices that are made and not made. And I think that for me certainly is the compulsion. That's why, you know, one would live your life in a rehearsal room, because that's the compulsion of kind of going, God, they could have done that or this or this or that or the other. And then at a certain point, your brain going, to make a fucking choice. You know, you gotta. But I think, sorry, we kind of.
But that's really interesting, and that is you know, what you're talking about there is the permission to call yourself an artist, and for that to be okay, to want to be in a rehearsal room and exploring who we are, what kind of human beings we are. What does it mean to be an Irish person in 2020? How does an Irish person react in this moment to this provocation, to this stress, to this set of circumstances? I mean, and that's very hard to, like, oh, you know, it's all bravado now. Like, got to standing outside the door waiting to go into that rehearsal room and the sweat's breaking on you, you know. But
you still walk in, though.
You do, don't you? Yeah.
You know what I mean? You still walk in. And I think And sorry, I mean, I'm not going to keep much longer because I could talk to you forever about this, but I think looking back from your sort of story, you kept walking in. Do you know what I mean? You kind of, whether it's through blind ignorance or at the beginning or stubbornness or whatever the hell it was, but there's a sense of, there's a bravery in that. And I think it shows in your work. You know, it shows in your work and the way you're honest about it and the way you talk about it now. That's there's a bravery in that. And in some ways that should be a normality, but it's not yet for everybody. So there's a bravery in kind of keeping walking in, because I'm sure you as a director could have made easier choices in rooms, could have made easy, you know, could have kind of had something that was good enough. That was kind of, but I'm sure, like you said at the very, very beginning there about kind of, you know, thinking before feeling. I think that stuck with me from this conversation.
Feeling before thinking.
Oh, did I say that wrong? That's obviously good. Now, there you go. Yes. And
I know what you mean. No, I knew what you meant. No, listen.
I purposely, to show my own idiocy, won't edit that out. But no, look, and I suppose I'm going to leave it at that, Caitriona, in a way, because I think, you know, what we've spoken about applies to so many of your different productions, and rather than going through each one, I think it's been a great exposition and conversation around not the art of directing, but I suppose the people that do it. You know, that it's kind of, you could talk to 50 million directors and they'd all have different takes based upon what their life journey has been. But I suppose the last thing I'll leave you with is, from your position now, kind of as we are in, well, early to mid-June, Jesus, where that year go to, around, because the director needs other people. It's the biggest collaboration role in a way. So being stuck in this hiatus is kind of, I'd say, a very weird place, is it?
Mark, I am demented. I'm demented. And I, you know, thought, wow, this is great. You know, this is like being back at school and having the summer holidays, and you'll have time to read and think. I can't do anything. I think I'm doing things. Then I discovered that it's 3 weeks later. Like, it's no accident. It's no accident that I'm in theatre. I need to be around people. This is hard. This is really hard. Like this chirpy thing that's going on now, that's not how it is most of the time. I'm finding it tough.
Yeah.
I also am really genuinely concerned by the fact that our government doesn't give a damn about us. I can't quite cope. I mean, I always knew that we weren't a priority, but we are so far down. I mean, to have a Taoiseach that is quoting film lines in his speeches and doesn't prioritize funding the arts, and doesn't even see the hypocrisy in what he's doing.
No,
I mean, that's.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think you're kind of going, you know, as we speak, that either a government over the next week is going to be formed or there's going to be another election, that, you know, the opportunity is now to, I was jokingly speaking to a friend the other day, kind of going, well, look, if they don't fund us, then we should all just give up, pack up our tents and leave. I mean, is that the message? Because at a certain point you kind of go, there's reality of people, and when I'm blessed to be salaried, there's realities of people who are really struggling because live arts can't be created. So if there's no supports there, well, that's a clear message, isn't it? So, you know, what are we all doing?
Yeah.
And
and what do people wheel out? Like everyone said it, but
so you would hope that, you know, I think within all that, I'm a great believer in, once things are explicit in the public domain, there's an opportunity to change them. Do you know what I mean? Once it's known, so you kind of go, okay, that's the level we're all at. Let's not pretend we're kind of here. We're here. So is that the way you really see us? And how can we kind of change that? Because now we all know, you know, it's and I think that's incumbent on us all to kind of, well, galvanize ourselves around that and try and get the best for all. Come here, listen, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for taking part, and for those that will see a nice smooth edit, we've had so many technical problems in the last couple of hours that it's been hilarious. So I hope we'll be able to find a cohesive conversation out of this. But Caitriona, it's been an absolute joy chatting to you, and I wish you well, and look forward to having a proper cuppa and a chat with you after we're all allowed back out again.
Brilliant. Look forward to it, Mark. Thanks a million.